Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic, the podcast that breaks down the incentives that guide the decisions we make to understand who benefits from the status quo and what's at stake for the future. I'm Matt Haller.
And I'm Chris Michaud.
On this week's show, we'll be diving into something that's as old as time itself, dating. Modern dating has taken on so many forms, but before we get into the latest happenings, Chris, I imagine you've been on a date or two in your life that involves some online matchmaking. What's your history here?
So the history of dating, and no, I don't go all the way back to the beginning of this, but the concept of dating by computer, if you will, started in 1965 with something called Operation Match. Think of this as the analog version of eHarmony, where a questionnaire was asked and filled out on paper. So the results were then transferred into punch cards, fed into a computer, and for about $3, so $30 today, you got your matches with names and phone numbers. A novel idea, but you can already see a couple of flaws with this. One, lack of visual stimulation. So a name and a phone number doesn't necessarily mean a lifelong relationship. And I think the other part of that too is assumed based on similarities, right? So the idea being you answered similar questions, and which defies another concept as old as time, which is the opposites attract doctrine. So fast forward, pun intended, into the 70s and 80s with the advent of video dating, and those services were super popular to connect people. So companies called Great Expectations. By the way, if you want a good laugh in the afternoon, go watch some of their YouTube videos about how this process worked. It was quite interesting. And they offered, along with some other companies, the idea of matchmaking services that you had these pre-recorded videos and you were able to create and watch these tapes before meeting someone in person. This was so prolific. There was a great clip in The Simpsons where Homer Simpson creates one of these dating videos for Ned Flanders. So it gives you an idea of how prevalent this was in society for quite a while. In the 90s, what you alluded to about my online dating, this is where the internet came along, and a website called kiss.com was one of the first online dating platforms, and that happened in 1994. This led to an explosion of online dating services such as Match.com and eHarmony, as I mentioned before. But the goal of these early platforms was really about hitting the traditional views of romance as we think about them. For example, eHarmony had this extensive questionnaire that you would fill out online, and the idea was matching you with a traditional sort of heterosexual relationship. Needless to say, it doesn't take very long to figure out that when we came to the 2000s, that the stratification of dating really began to take hold. Various interests such as Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, and then you had the acceptance of really the LGBT community with OkCupid, Grindr, and Her. Now you even get more nuanced even outside of that, such as like Farmers Only, J-Date, Silver Singles, etc. And so really the dating world today, while largely virtual, is more nuanced than it's ever been before.
We can't also leave out my personal favorite, It's Just Lunch, which is advertised exclusively in the Hemispheres magazine on United Airlines.
Is that still around? Wow.
It's not online, but in the air, it's up there.
Virtual lunch would be hard to replicate, I would imagine. But okay, yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that either.
As we zoom out and we look at the trend from the 1960s you're describing up until today, there's two trends that I think emerged. The first one is the idea of this dating support, this auxiliary moment. In the early days, it was supposed to augment the dating that you were doing, right? It was not like you're like, I'm just going to focus and whatever the mainframe spits out. All right, Carol number 2, that's going to be my person. That's not the way that people were dating. Two things have happened. Number one, we've pushed more towards remote work. People aren't seeing each other face to face as often. And with these apps being in your phone, in your pocket, how does the incentive structure change in the way that you think about meeting somebody, the value of that interaction, and ultimately the way that we think about our human relationships moving forward?
When you go back to, let's say, online dating in the 90s, right? I think the concept there was novel, was interesting. We still largely dated in person then. The awkwardness of having to go into a bar and look at someone in the eye and have that conversation was alive and well. To your point around remote work, as we have fewer and fewer of those opportunities, let's say, for example, someone who's living in Montana, right? The ability to try to meet someone who's like you in a social setting, the volume isn't there. So I think the idea of being able to open up that aperture and say, hey, there are some interesting folks I can meet who I might have not otherwise met in my normal social circle is valuable and important. A couple other things too. We were getting married later. So the idea of dating later in life is not uncommon versus 50 years ago, at the beginning of this, the average marriage age was like 20, right? I think my grandparents got married in the early 1950s. My grandmother was 24 and she was considered old. which is hilarious. And then also the acceptance of more marriage equality and sort of gender shift in gender roles has really opened up online dating as well. Let's be honest, right? 25 years ago, there are only certain bars you could walk into if, let's say, for example, you're transgendered, right? I think today having online apps and dating as a way to do that allows someone to be able to essentially find like for like people or people that they're interested in versus a long time ago in person, as valuable as it is, was very much like shooting fish in a barrel. The positives outweigh the negatives in terms of the ability to online online date and find folks versus 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's also a change in people's preferences. There was an idea of like, when I'm going to go meet someone for the first time, I'm like, let's just meet for dinner, right? And you're like, who wants to sit down for like an hour and a half? Because I'm sorry, if you are on a date with a fucking dud, then you are going to be there for a long time. I've heard a lot of like interviews with younger women who will say, I'll know within 5 minutes, within 2 minutes, whether this is going to be a 5-minute discussion or a 30-minute discussion. But I'd rather have the ability to pull the trigger, and I can do that. I can screen a partner with a virtual app, but then also that first interaction isn't going to be something with as much of a commitment as we've seen in the past. So it seems like there's been a lot of changes in our trends and perceptions and what we're really prioritizing as we're exploring dating as a society, even as that medium is changing. But let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be diving into the world of dating with Kelsey Barberio, a journalist and social media influencer who met her partner via a dating app. We'll be right back.
Hey B2B sales pros, want to maximize your team's performance? Discover Compose Comp, your key to optimize sales incentives. We blend expertise and technology to give your reps the edge they need to close deals. Don't settle for ordinary. Visit composecomp.com and unlock your team's full potential today.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our first guest is Kelsey Barberio, a journalist and social media influencer who met her partner of 3 years through dating apps. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's just start out with something fun. What's the most interesting dating experience you've had while using dating apps?
When I first moved to New York City years ago, I went on a date with a guy who was a self-proclaimed billionaire, which red flag already. Like anyone who's going to call themselves a billionaire, you're probably looking for the wrong things. But I was like, hey, I just moved here. This sounds like a story, if nothing else. And I went out with this guy and he like had some diamond encrusted Rolex and picked a rooftop where he could point to his penthouse apartment with all the lights left on, allegedly. He has an Amex Black card. I still remember this. We took a photo in a photo booth and his card wouldn't work. So I had to use my card.
Oh my, there's no way I could top that. So maybe just taking a step back, what attracted you to apps or using online dating versus sort of traditional methods that we know of?
I consider myself to be a hopeless romantic. And so anytime I was going to Trader Joe's while I was single, I was like, I'm going to meet the love of my life today. They're going to see me in the produce aisle and they're going to come up to me. But guess what? That doesn't really happen. And the people that did come up to me most often in person seemed like they were absolutely out of their mind. But I think I got onto dating apps because it was really just the way that everybody else was doing it. And it seemed if I wanted to be intentional about dating and if it was something that was important to me, which it very much was, that was the only way to ensure that I was actively trying, if that makes sense.
You're someone who has a strong social media presence. Did you approach those apps like using the same sort of rigor as you would for your other social media presence?
So the funny thing about my social media presence is it happened because I met my boyfriend. I vlogged before we went on our first date and I didn't even say who he was. I didn't expect anything to happen, but it just all happened to work out. And he and I are still together 3 years later. So obviously things are going pretty well. We live together. But because of that, I would say that I did treat it like a job almost. And I was checking those apps every day. And guess what? It got a little bleak sometimes. If you swipe for too long, it gets bleak.
Is there that concept of, I call it the abundance of scarcity, right? So if you're on all of these apps and you, to your point, you're always swiping, like, did it feel like there was a lot of frogs, if you will, before you met the right person?
Oh, I swear these apps nowadays, it's worse than when I was actively on there. They want you to pay money. If you're going to get the hotties, you've got to pay some serious money. And they put the good ones, they'll show you, they're behind a paywall. They'll give them roses or something on Hinge, I think is what it is. But yeah, you got to cough out some cash if you want to get the actual good ones. And I think they would kind of entice you in the very beginning. They're really good about that. Like when you first got the app, they would show you some really good ones. So you're like, oh, Hinge has got it going on. Bumble, wow. And then if you scroll for too long, it definitely starts to get worse.
So is there almost the incentive to using apps these days, or at least what you've seen and heard from your friends, is basically you got to pay to play if you want to have kind of the positive dating experience that you had?
I think so. After a while, all these algorithms are so smart, right? Like you go on TikTok, you go on your For You page, it knows you better than probably some of your best friends. And I think these dating apps have the same elements to them where it's like, okay, Kelsey tends to like guys who are 6 feet tall and have dark hair. And so they're going to be like, oh, those are the ones behind the paywall. And I really think that they get to be so smart like that. And they'll see maybe there are some guys that get liked more than others. They're definitely going to be the ones behind a paywall.
So to that end, then, navigating this minefield, how long were you on these apps before you met your partner?
I think I was 21 when I probably first got on them. And then, because when I was in college, they didn't really exist yet. I remember when Tinder first came out and it was like, wow, that was just a hookup app. And now I know tons of people people who've gotten married from Tinder. But I think so 21 to probably 25. That doesn't sound like as long as it felt. It felt like an eternity.
You know what? We could always put it in statistics. You're like, I spent 20% of my life on dating apps.
You know what? That's a really good point. I was like, I'm never going to find someone. I'm just out here slumming it.
I would imagine that as a single female dating on these apps, for every one message you reach out, you probably got 100 back, right? And there's some drama with that too, I would imagine.
Definitely sometimes. There are so many guys, though, I found that would not want, like you would send the first message, and I was always down to meet up because I was like, you're not going to know anything until you meet up with somebody. And I found it very uninteresting to just make small talk with somebody I didn't know on an app. I'm happy to do that once I know you, but before then, no. But I found that it was really hard to find guys that were down to commit to an actual date. And like, I would really be the one that was like, okay, like text me actually outside the app, or let's go out and meet in person. And I think it's because they didn't want to have to go spend the $50 or whatever on a couple cocktails that guys usually end up having to pay, which is fair. Because if you're doing that multiple times a week and you're 22 living in New York, it's pretty pricey.
Sounds like some of these other folks, just based on what you were doing or interacting with them, really weren't up for what they said they were up for.
No, they definitely weren't. They always say guys are way less mature than girls are at a certain age. And I think that's totally true. I mean, it totally varies case by case, but I often was dating much older on the dating apps than I actually probably would if I was meeting somebody in real life. And I think it was just because they were the ones that were more down to actually make an effort and make a nice plan versus the 24-year-olds that just wanted to go to a club.
Again, to your point, right? It's finding that right balance. So if you could predict the future, what will the world of dating apps look like in 5 years?
I think it's going to be a little scary. I think we're going to get some AI flavor in there, and it's going to be even more predictive of what people would want. I feel like people are like already scared to go out and do the thing and be in person. And I think we're only going to get worse in that regard. And I hope that's not the case. But I think that it's going to be a lot more virtual for a longer time. And it's going to encourage that by being on the apps.
I would concur with your opinion, being someone who is a bit of a hopeless romantic, I guess now admitted on our Fuzzy Logic podcast. But yeah, the whole lack of in-person interaction. And there might be people who are perfectly fine in an app that is an AI world where all they are virtually dating someone who may or may not even exist.
Right. I think that's happening so often. The catfishing thing is overly common. Like it is an all the time thing, I feel like, for people already. And yes, they can do verifications and things, but I feel like even just in the sense of the apps learning exactly what you want and who you should be looking for, I think it's going to take away some of the choice in the matter a little bit, even if you don't realize it. It's going to funnel the people to you that it thinks you should be with versus the people that maybe would be a better match for you.
Do you think they're almost going to be that strata? You alluded to it in the beginning where you pay for better quality. Do you think that with AI, do you think that apps will actually stratify that to a way to drive further incentives? In other words, the people who can pay the most get the best mates.
Oh, absolutely. I think that all dating apps at one point were free, and I might be totally wrong on that. But the fact that they're even paid is a relatively newer concept. And I think as these companies, a lot of them are public. There's like Match that owns so many of them all together in one, and they're all going to just want to continue making more money, no matter how much money they're making. So they're going to have to find ways to sneak another $5 a month out of people.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. And I think you're right. It's something that's not going to go away anytime soon. But with that in mind, thanks so much for joining us, Kelsey. We're going to take a quick break and then come back to chat with our second guest, who's been a part of the inner workings of OkCupid. Stay with us.
Calling all B2B sales executives. Ready to elevate your sales game? Meet Compose Comp, your partner in sales incentive excellence. Our tailored solutions blend expert design with tech innovation, ensuring your reps have the confidence to close deals. Take the first step to sales success. Visit composecomp.com and schedule your consultation now.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our second guest is Michael Kaye, Director of Brand Marketing and Communications at ARCHER and OkCupid. Welcome to Fuzzy Logic, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Fuzzy Logic is all about the incentives that guide why we do the things that we do. And we know that people get on dating apps to find love, but from a business perspective, we know that dating apps are still businesses that have to make money. From your point of view, how have those whys evolved over the last few years from both a consumer and a business perspective in this space?
It's a really great question. All dating apps want people off the app as soon as possible. And I know for any listeners, they might say, sure, yeah, right. But word of mouth is so important in our business. When you think about it, no one is going to download a dating app if no one in their immediate circle has met someone on it. So we actually want you to find what you're looking for, whether that's something more casual or serious. So I think before you ever download a dating app, you have to really be mindful and intentional about which one you're choosing, because they're not all the same. They all serve different purposes. So you definitely can find the one that's right for you, but also the data proves it too. A Stanford study actually found that more than half of all heterosexual couples who met in 2021 actually met online. And that's even higher for same-sex couples. LGBTQ plus people were really early adopters to online dating. And we're actually heading towards an age where most of the babies born will be born to parents of people who met online, which I find really interesting. And then from the consumer's perspective, what singles are prioritizing has really evolved. So I joined the dating space in 2019. When I first started looking at the data on OkCupid and seeing what people were prioritizing, they were, from years past, they were looking for people who also liked coffee dates or also liked movie dates. And the pandemic forced all of us to take a step back and reevaluate what's really important to us in our lives. And when we re-looked at what people were ranking as important, especially women on our platform, it was wildly different last year. The most important questions to women on OkCupid were, are you pro-choice? Should the government defund Planned Parenthood? Is mental health as important as physical health? Do you support marriage equality? So people are now really looking for partners who have compatible beliefs and views as them. It's no longer, are you tall, dark, and handsome? Do you believe climate change is real? Do you support Black Lives Matter? Do you believe everyone deserves the right to get married and that I get to choose what to do with my own body? And I think that's a great trend.
So as you think about that, what factors do you think make dating apps stand out and be successful? And on the flip side, what makes them get left behind?
I don't think there's one dating app that you could deem successful for every single type of person out there. Going back to what, I mentioned in the beginning, you have to be really intentional about what you're looking for. You have to recognize what you need from a dating app. So for OkCupid, we're seeing a ton of different people across the board: polyamorous, monogamous, Gen Zers, Gen Xers, millennials. But our sweet spot are really people who are looking for that relationship that's going to last forever. To be quite honest, we make you jump through a lot of hoops to create a profile on OkCupid. It's not something that's going to take you a few seconds. You have to answer at least 15 matching questions. Most people go on to answer dozens and dozens more. You have multiple photos to upload, many prompts to fill out. We really want you to do the work. And on the back end, that helps us weed out all the people who are looking for something a bit more casual, because what we've come to see is that the people coming to OkCupid are just those that want that forever person. There's obviously still people on the app that are looking for something more casual, but if you are looking for a hookup, which absolutely nothing wrong with, OkCupid's just not going to be your first app of choice. And that's okay to us too.
Do you find that most of your users are coming to you from other apps first, that this isn't their first rodeo in the online dating space, but that they say, I walked into this space expecting one thing, realized maybe this app was facilitating a different kind of interaction, and I know that I want something a little bit more holistic, so I'm going to go to an app that's really going to weed out and make sure I'm meeting people who are more compatible with what I'm interested in?
Did you read our target consumer persona before this? Because spot on. The biggest demo on our app are people in their mid-20s, late 20s. And to your point, this isn't the first app that they're trying. They're tired of some of the other apps that they've tried in the past. And they're like, you know what? I really want to be more intentional. I want to find someone who has the same beliefs as me, the same values, that's also looking for marriage, if that's what I'm looking for, also looking for children or not, whether that's something I'm looking for or not. And they just don't want to waste time anymore going out and getting ready and grabbing a drink with someone only to sit down and say, wow, not only do we not have anything in common, but we're really just not compatible. We don't want the same things in life.
Our last guest talked a lot about swiping on dating apps and how that feels very impersonal. And AI, of course, the buzzword of the day, seems to be offering some disruption to everything, but dating digitally as well. Do you think there's a role where AI has a place in dating apps and can actually make that process feel more personal?
Yeah, so actually we've been using AI for years on dating apps, and mainly in terms of moderation and safety, but we've started to use it in more creative ways. Last year at OkCupid, for those who are not familiar, we match people through our matching questions. So last year we added created a handful of questions that were written by ChatGPT, and they've been answered almost 4 million times already in the past year. And we're actually now in the process of adding brand new ChatGPT generated questions to the app for summer. And we're going to be publishing a dating advice blog post that's actually written by the AI tool, which I think is really cool. I also work at ARCHER, which is a completely different app. ARCHER is a newer app for gay, bisexual, and queer men. And every profile is selfie verified on ARCHER. So for that, we use a combination of AI technology and human moderation. This tech is used further in Archer's chat feature, where we smart blur photos that may contain nudity to help give our users agency and control over when they actually see the photo. So for many of our apps, we're using AI in different ways.
For Archer, the demographic is gay or bisexual men who are sick and tired of opening an app and getting a picture of someone's full frontal nudity just right in front of them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. We created Archer in 2023. It's for gay, bisexual, and queer men, and we really identified this white space in the market. When we looked at the gay dating apps out there, they've all been created, at least the biggest players, had been created over a decade ago, and there's actually been very little innovation since. What we were hearing was that people wanted something new, an app created today by gay men for gay men, a dating app that ditches anonymity and toxicity for celebration, where every profile is selfie verified. And what I love about it, being a gay man myself, when I first started experimenting with dating apps back in 2014, there were two dating apps that I chose. One was the biggest gay dating app out there, and the other was Tinder. And when I went on the gay dating app, as someone who was closeted, I thought this was going to be a space where I can find community, where I can finally feel comfortable chatting with other gay men. And what I was met with was a grid of blank profiles, black squares. Some profiles didn't even have a name, let alone a photo. And it was actually really traumatizing for me at that age. I was 22, I just graduated college. And for me, it really reinforced this idea that queer love and connection should remain secretive and hidden. And I actually found success and love on Tinder. That was a safe space for me. So when we started building Archer, our chief product officer is an openly gay man. The heads of several of our teams are openly gay men. We really wanted to solve a need for our users and create an app that really would have changed each of our lives when we were younger.
It sounds like you found, and again, just back to the point around the incentive around dating, there was an actual incentive of market of folks who are more mature, not necessarily age, but like more emotionally mature, where there was a demand that wasn't being fed by any of these other apps. Obviously, there's a business incentive behind it, but also just from your own personal experience, there's a need that helps fulfill that socially that didn't exist before.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing from a lot of the other apps is that they've served a purpose for this community for a really long time. And I don't think that's going to change either. But people are really going to them for hookups. And there was no option really, at least that was completely for queer men, for any of them who wanted something a little bit deeper, more meaningful. And when we look at who's coming to Archer right now, almost 80% of people are looking for dates. Over 70% of them want a relationship. 74% of them actually want friendship as well. 65%, the lowest bucket, are people who are looking for hookup. So we're seeing that people are really coming to the app to say, you know, I kind of want to go on a date. I want to go to dinner. I want to meet someone for coffee or drinks, and maybe want to be monogamous right now. And I want something a little bit more meaningful than someone different every weekend. And again, whatever your route or whatever your journey is with dating is completely okay. But that's sort of what we're seeing right now on Archer.
It feels as though the very successful business strategy has been see where other dating apps are going to fall down and fail, and pick up those people where at that point in the customer journey, they're a little bit more self-aware of what they want. And I wonder if that creates more cordial environment, because at least you're saying I'm self-selecting about I'm coming to this app for a specific reason, as opposed to multiple different personas, user types, and desires all trying to mix and mingle.
The data shows us that most people are on multiple dating apps at a time. So I think for us, it's about figuring out what our place is within that mix for the consumer, and how are we offering something different and better than the others within that mix. There are a ton of dating apps out there, hundreds, if not thousands, and we see a lot of them flop and a lot actually just don't last. And I think for us, when we look at the ones that didn't make it, it's those dating apps that weren't created to solve a problem that people actually had, or they didn't listen to the pain points of their daters and refuse to adapt their product. So we're really mindful for each of our apps about who we're serving and how we're creating a better, stronger experience for that demographic. There's a reason OkCupid's been around for 20 years. It's an OG in the dating app space. Our app is designed in a way where the more questions you answer, the more compatible your matches are. And we did that because we really heard from the millions of single people out there that they don't want to waste their time going on dates with people that they just don't have anything in common with, or their beliefs and values don't align. So we made it really easy for them. And then going to Archer, there just hasn't been a new app that has come out. There's been very little innovation in the space for gay men. So people really just wanted something new. And we figured if we're going to create something for queer men, it has to be so different from what's readily available. And we have to give them what they really want. Prior to the launch, we spoke with over 1,000 gay, bisexual, and queer men all across the United States and asked them, what do you love about dating? What do you hate about dating? What do you wish you could have in a dating app? Sort of a help us help you moment.
Michael, I think we've learned a lot about how a lot of these dating apps have developed, what's important to them, and also what consumers are looking for today. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Chris and I are going to discuss our predictions. So stay with us. Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. It's time for some predictions. Chris, how are we going to date in the future?
Clearly, apps aren't going anywhere. And in fact, they're getting more sophisticated, which I find to be exciting because the opportunity to be able to find the right app for you sounds like something that is going to be around for a while. And as long as there's a continued market opportunity for it and a need for it, I think it'll be created.
Yeah, I think we want to remember that dating has always been hard. Always. Relationships have always been hard for everybody. This is just a digital twist on it. And so when we struggle to find a partner and struggle to make progress in some of those dating apps, I think it's easy, just like with every other product in the world, to say it's that product's problem. And they don't want me to find love. They want me to pay my premium subscription, stay on forever, and that's it. But what we heard from Michael is that's actually not the case, because in a highly competitive environment where you have so many different, not just options, but specialized options for your specific interests or the kind of communities that you want to be around, those platforms have to incentivize and have to work. Otherwise, their business model falls down entirely.
Yeah, I think to your point around apps wanting folks to eventually be off of them, I think great example, Kelsey, our first guest, right? Actually, since the recording till now, got engaged, right? So clearly the dating app worked. So there's an opportunity there to create essentially a testimonial, real life testimonial to the capability of that app. So without that, I think you're right. It doesn't feel real and tangible to folks. As we think about going forward in the incentives, I think there'll be more incentives to say, how can I get people not only engaged in the app faster, but also leading to something, whatever that meaningful is, whether it's marriage or a relationship or whatever. I think having a way to accelerate that and using tools like AI to make that happen, I think will draw more people and by definition be an incentive to want to date.
I mean, regardless of the tool that you use or how much AI has been plugged into it, nothing is going to help you figure out what you want. And so being intentional about showing up and wanting to, even if that is to a kind of experiment, say, I want to experiment and try to meet different people to figure out what I want, that's totally cool. But I think what we heard from some of our guests is that showing up with that intentionality is pretty key to just making that digital experience work. I think another, call it concern, we've also heard that most people are looking to date people who are very like-minded to them, which makes a lot of sense. As we start to weed out more people, are we starting to date more like-minded people exclusively? We're not challenging our worldview, and is there value in that part of the interaction as well?
You took the words out of my mouth. That was the back of my mind as well, which is, again, similar to any other algorithm. Are we making it where, yes, it's great that I have a lot of like-minded opportunities, but do we also have the caution of you get into kind of a group think, right? But opposites attract has been around for a long time. And the reason it's still a phrase is because it's a reality.
And look, I mean, you can say that our digital world is just going to be a reflection of our physical one. When we talk about the algorithm, is that helping us challenge our worldview, meet different people to expand what we view and how we understand the world around us? Or is it reinforcing, and I say this for every algorithm, regardless of dating, just one example, but or is the algorithm reinforcing some kind of a structure that we just take for granted?
Well, imagine a world where this could go like interesting sideways. Chris Michaud invents an app called the 800 Plus, which is you have to have an 800 Plus credit score to join it. There's ways where you get into that algorithm that can be really interesting. But Matt, I think certainly our guests have helped us outline some of the incentives and where we're going to head in the future.
On that note, Chris, I think we can have you read us out.
Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Fuzzy Logic. Fuzzy Logic is produced by Mitch Rissmiller, our newest dating app expert. New episodes drop on Wednesdays wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.